The Coronary Protocol: 10 Life-Saving Strategies to Defeat the Silent Killer. In the sterile silence of an emergency room, the difference between life and death is measured in seconds. Cardiovascular disease remains the apex predator of modern health, a silent assassin that claims a life every 40 seconds in the United States alone. Yet this biological siege is not inevitable. By mastering the physiological mechanics of the coronary system, we can transform vulnerability into an impenetrable fortress against failure. We have analyzed the medical archives to bring you the ultimate defense strategy. It begins with the fundamental fuel that powers our biological engine.
To understand the primacy of diet in the prevention and treatment of myocardial infarction, one must first abandon the simplistic notion of food as merely fuel. In the context of cardiovascular health, every morsel consumed is a piece of complex chemical code that instructs our biology to either thrive or decay. The war against heart disease is fought in the trenches of the endothelial lining, the microscopic single-cell layer that coats the interior of our blood vessels, and the weapon of choice, for better or worse, is nutrition. The modern investigative lens reveals that atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of arteries, is not simply a plumbing problem caused by grease, but a sophisticated chronic inflammatory response that is modulated almost entirely by what enters the human digestive system. The narrative of heart-healthy eating has undergone a tumultuous evolution, a history rife with scientific feuds, industrial manipulation, and radical paradigm shifts. For decades, the medical establishment, influenced by the mid-20th century hypotheses of researchers like Ansel Keys, demonized dietary fat as the sole architect of coronary doom. This led to the low-fat craze of the 1980s and 90s, a massive public health experiment that inadvertently flooded the Western diet with refined carbohydrates and sugars to replace the missing flavor of fats. The result was catastrophic: a skyrocketing prevalence of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome, all potent precursors to heart attacks. We now understand that the biochemistry of nutrition is far more nuanced. It is not just about cholesterol numbers, it is about the particle size of lipoproteins, the oxidation of LDL, and the systemic inflammation triggered by insulin spikes. When we analyze the mechanism of prevention, we are looking at the stabilization of the endothelium. A diet rich in ultra-processed foods, trans fats, and excessive sugars triggers an assault on this delicate lining. High blood glucose acts like shards of glass, micro-tearing the vessel walls. In response, the body sends low-density lipoprotein, LDL cholesterol, to patch the damage. However, in an oxidative environment created by poor diet, specifically one lacking in antioxidants found in plants, this LDL becomes oxidized. The immune system identifies oxidized LDL as a foreign invader, dispatching macrophages to consume it.
These macrophages gorge themselves until they become foam cells, eventually dying and piling up to form the fatty streaks that mature into calcified plaque. This is the genesis of a heart attack. Prevention, therefore, is the dietary interruption of this cascade. The Mediterranean diet serves as the gold standard in this arena, not because of a romanticized view of European living, but because of its biochemical efficiency. The investigative data surrounding the Mediterranean Protocol, rich in olive oil, nuts, fatty fish, and vegetables, is staggering. The magic lies in the synergy of its components. Extra virgin olive oil, for instance, is not merely a lipid, it is a delivery system for oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory compound that mimics the effects of ibuprofen. When consumed regularly, it suppresses the chronic inflammation that makes arterial plaque unstable and prone to rupture. Furthermore, the high intake of omega-3 fatty acids from fish stabilizes the electrical activity of the heart, reducing the risk of fatal arrhythmias, while the fiber from vegetables binds to cholesterol in the digestive tract, preventing its absorption into the bloodstream. In the realm of treatment and recovery post-infarction, diet transcends prevention and becomes an active therapeutic agent. After a heart attack, the cardiac tissue is damaged, and the body is in a state of extreme oxidative stress. The metabolic demand changes. The heart needs fuel that is efficient and easy to process. Here, the focus shifts to metabolic flexibility. A recovering heart is often energy-starved. The introduction of specific nutrients becomes critical. Magnesium and potassium, abundant in leafy greens and avocados, are essential for stabilizing the heart's rhythm and preventing the chaotic electrical signals that can lead to sudden cardiac death during recovery. The post-attack diet is about plaque stabilization. Soft, lipid-rich plaques are the ones that rupture and cause clots. A diet strictly limiting saturated fats and eliminating trans fats helps dry out these fatty plaques, creating a fibrous cap that is less likely to burst. Moreover, we must examine the DASH dietary approaches to stop hypertension protocol, which is frequently prescribed alongside the Mediterranean approach. The DASH diet is a masterclass in mineral balance. In the modern American diet, the sodium to potassium ratio is dangerously inverted.
We consume massive amounts of sodium, which draws water into the blood vessels, increasing pressure, and minimal potassium, which relaxes vessel walls and excretes sodium. By flipping this ratio through a plant-heavy diet, patients can mechanically lower the pressure within the arterial system, reducing the shear stress on the healing heart muscle and preventing the turbulent blood flow that damages arteries. A deeper, more cutting-edge layer of this investigation involves the gut microbiome, a frontier that was virtually invisible to cardiologists 20 years ago. We now know that specific gut bacteria, when fed choline, red meat, and eggs, produce a compound called TMA, trimethylamine, which converts to TMAO, trimethylamine and oxide. High levels of TMAO are directly linked to platelet hyperreactivity, meaning the blood is more likely to clot, and the acceleration of atherosclerosis. This reveals that diet is not just about calories or macronutrients, it is about cultivating an internal ecosystem that does not produce toxins which attack the heart. A plant-forward diet alters the microbiome composition, reducing the bacteria that produce TMA, thereby lowering the risk of a secondary heart attack through a completely separate biological pathway. The psychological and behavioral aspect of dietary change post-trauma cannot be overstated. Food is deeply tied to dopamine reward pathways. The comfort food that many turn to in times of stress is chemically engineered to be hyperpalatable, hijacking the brain's circuitry. For a heart attack survivor, the transition to a heart-healthy diet is effectively a detoxification process. It requires breaking the addiction to the sugar-fat-salt triad. However, the physiological rewards are rapid. Within weeks of adopting a whole food plant-predominant diet, endothelial function improves. The arteries literally become more flexible, able to dilate and constrict with greater ease. This restoration of vasodilation is the primary goal of recovery, ensuring that the compromised heart muscle receives adequate oxygen even under stress. Furthermore, we must address the role of insulin resistance. A staggering percentage of heart attack victims have undiagnosed prediabetes or metabolic syndrome. When the diet is high in refined carbohydrates, insulin levels remain chronically elevated. Insulin is a growth factor. It tells cells to grow. In the context of arteries,
It stimulates the growth of smooth muscle cells within the vessel wall, thickening them and narrowing the lumen. By restricting refined carbs and focusing on low glycemic foods, a patient reduces circulating insulin. This halts the thickening of the arterial walls and allows the body's natural fibrinolytic, clot-dissolving systems to work more effectively. In the final analysis of this entry, maintaining a healthy diet is the foundational bedrock of cardiac survival. It is a daily multi-dose pharmaceutical intervention without the side effects. Whether it is the polyphenols in berries scrubbing free radicals from the blood, the nitrates in beets converting to nitric oxide to open up blood vessels, or the soluble fiber in oats dragging cholesterol out of the system, food is the lever by which we control our genetic destiny. To ignore diet while treating a heart attack with stents and pills is to bail water out of a sinking ship without plugging the hole. The chemistry of what we eat dictates the structural integrity of the heart itself.
If diet is the chemistry of cardiac health, exercise is the physics. The human heart is, in its most reductive definition, a mechanical pump, and the vascular system is a hydraulic network. However, unlike any man-made machine, this biological system requires stress to maintain its integrity. The investigative reality of modern sedentary life is that it is fundamentally incompatible with human physiology. We evolved as persistent hunters, designed to move for hours across the savannah. When we stop moving, the machinery does not just sit idle, it begins to dismantle itself. Exercise is not merely a recommendation for weight loss, it is the primary stimulus for hemodynamic optimization and the only known method to naturally re-engineer the anatomy of the heart. To understand the preventative power of exercise, we must deep dive into the phenomenon of shear stress. When the body is at rest, blood flow is relatively laminar and slow. However, during vigorous physical activity, the heart rate rises and blood creates friction against the endothelial lining of the arteries. This friction is known as shear stress. Far from being damaging, this stress is the signal that keeps the arteries alive. The endothelial cells detect this friction and respond by releasing a miraculous gas called nitric oxide, NO. Nitric oxide is the body's most potent vasodilator. It causes the smooth muscle of the arteries to relax, widening the vessels and lowering blood pressure. But its role goes deeper. NO prevents white blood cells and platelets from sticking to the vessel walls, effectively Teflon coating the arteries against plaque formation. Without the shear stress of exercise, NO production drops, and the arteries become stiff, sticky, and prone to blockage. Regular exercise triggers a cascade of structural adaptations known as positive remodeling. In the preventative phase, consistent aerobic activity forces the heart muscle, the myocardium, to become more efficient. The chamber size of the left ventricle, the main pumping chamber, may increase slightly, allowing it to hold more blood, while the muscular walls become stronger. This results in an increased stroke volume, the amount of blood ejected with each beat. Consequently, the resting heart rate drops. A lower resting heart rate is a significant marker of longevity. It means the engine is idling more efficiently,
Saving billions of beats over a lifetime and reducing the mechanical wear and tear on the organ. However, the most profound impact of exercise and its critical role in treatment and recovery is the process of angiogenesis, or the creation of collateral circulation. This is the biological equivalent of a natural bypass surgery. When a person exercises regularly, the demand for oxygen in the heart muscle exceeds the supply provided by the main coronary arteries. This mild, controlled hypoxic stress signals the body to release growth factors, such as VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. In response, the heart sprouts new tiny blood vessels, collaterals, that bridge gaps between existing arteries. In the event of a blockage in a major artery, a well-exercised heart often has a network of these back roads that can reroute blood flow around the clot, preserving the tissue and turning a potentially fatal massive heart attack into a minor event or even a silent one. The sedentary heart lacks this safety net. When the main road closes, the tissue dies. In the context of treatment following heart attack, the philosophy of exercise has undergone a radical 180-degree turn. In the 1950s, the standard of care for a myocardial infarction was 6 weeks of strict bed rest. We now know this was disastrous, leading to muscle atrophy, blood clots, and depression. Today, the protocol is early mobilization, often within 24 to 48 hours of the event. Cardiac rehabilitation is a medically supervised program that treats exercise as a precision drug. The dosing is critical. Post-heart attack, the heart muscle is scarred and vulnerable. The goal is to safely elevate the heart rate to stimulate recovery without overloading the weakened pump. This controlled stress improves endothelial function, which is often severely impaired after an infarction. The physiological benefits of post-infarction exercise extend to the autonomic system. A heart attack disrupts the balance between the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. Survivors often have a hyperactive sympathetic drive, leading to higher heart rates and a greater risk of lethal arrhythmias. Exercise training helps restore vagal tone, enhancing the parasympathetic influence. This electrical stabilization is arguably the most critical factor in preventing sudden cardiac death in the year following a heart attack. Furthermore,
We must examine the impact of exercise on the systemic metabolic environment. Exercise is the most effective tool for improving insulin sensitivity. Skeletal muscle is the largest consumer of glucose in the body. When we exercise, our muscles become sponges for sugar, pulling it out of the bloodstream independent of insulin. This is vital for diabetic patients, who are at the highest risk for heart attacks. By normalizing blood sugar and reducing visceral fat, the dangerous fat stored around organs, exercise removes the toxic metabolic soup that inflames the coronary arteries. The debate between high-intensity interval training, HIIT, and moderate steady-state cardio, LIS, in the context of heart health is a subject of intense research. While steady-state cardio, like walking or jogging, has long been the prescription, recent data suggests that HIIT may offer superior benefits for vascular elasticity. The rapid spikes in heart rate followed by recovery periods challenge the arterial walls to expand and contract rapidly, essentially training the flexibility of the vascular system. However, for a recovering heart patient, this intensity must be carefully titrated. The Goldilocks zone of exercise intensity is crucial. Too little provides no stimulus, while extreme ultra-endurance exercise can sometimes lead to myocardial fibrosis, scarring in susceptible individuals. This nuance highlights the need for personalized exercise prescriptions. Resistance training, once considered dangerous for heart patients due to the temporary spike in blood pressure during lifting, is now recognized as an essential component of the prevention and treatment matrix. Building muscle mass acts as a metabolic sink, storing glucose and burning calories at rest. Moreover, frailty is a major predictor of mortality in heart failure patients. Strength training maintains functional independence and reduces the cardiac workload for daily activities. When the muscles of the legs and arms are stronger, the heart doesn't have to work as hard to move the body. There is also a profound psychological dimension to exercise and recovery. A heart attack is a betrayal by the body. Survivors often develop kinesiophobia, or fear of movement, believing that exertion will trigger another attack. Cardiac rehabilitation shatters this fear loop. By exercising under monitoring, patients learn that their heart can withstand stress.
this confidence is physiological as well as psychological. It reduces the release of cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones that are themselves toxic to the cardiovascular system. Ultimately, exercise acts as a systemic anti-aging serum for the cardiovascular system. It reduces the stiffness of the aorta, improves the fluidity of the blood, and optimizes the oxygen extraction capability of the muscles. From the cellular level, where it stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, creating more energy power plants within the cells, to the macro level of hemodynamic flow, movement is the signal that tells the body to maintain its hardware. In the grand investigation of heart health, a sedentary lifestyle is not merely the absence of exercise, it is an active state of decay. To prevent a heart attack, or to rise from the ashes of one, the prescription is clear. The human animal was built for motion, and in motion it finds its salvation. The heart is a muscle that demands to be used, and in honoring that demand, we secure our survival.
To light a cigarette is to voluntarily initiate a chemical warfare campaign against one's own cardiovascular infrastructure. While the public consciousness has largely tethered tobacco use to lung cancer, a horrific but often delayed consequence, the relationship between smoking and the heart is far more immediate, volatile, and mechanically devastating. In the grand investigation of preventable death, smoking stands as the unrivaled architect of coronary destruction, a habit that systematically dismantles the heart's ability to function through a multi-pronged assault of asphyxiation, inflammation, and coagulation. The smoke from burning tobacco contains over 7,000 chemicals, a toxic slurry including arsenic, formaldehyde, and hydrogen cyanide. However, when we isolate the cardiovascular impact, we are primarily observing the catastrophic interplay of three agents: nicotine, carbon monoxide, and oxidative particulate matter. The journey of smoke from the lips to the coronary arteries is terrifyingly swift. Within seconds of inhalation, nicotine, a potent alkaloid and sympathomimetic drug, crosses the blood-brain barrier and triggers a release of catecholamines, specifically adrenaline and noradrenaline. This biological alarm bell forces the heart to beat faster and harder, drastically increasing its demand for oxygen. Simultaneously, nicotine acts as a powerful vasoconstrictor. It clamps down on the blood vessels, narrowing the pathways through which blood must flow. This creates a lethal paradox. The heart is screaming for more fuel to manage the increased workload, but the pipelines delivering that fuel are being squeezed shut. For a healthy individual, this is a strain. For someone with underlying atherosclerosis, it is often the trigger for ischemia, a starvation of the heart muscle that precipitates a heart attack. However, the villainy of nicotine pales in comparison to the insidious nature of carbon monoxide, CO. If nicotine is the whip that drives the heart to exhaustion, carbon monoxide is the suffocator. Hemoglobin, the red blood cell protein responsible for transporting oxygen, has an affinity for carbon monoxide that is 200 times greater than its affinity for oxygen. When a smoker inhales, CO hijacks the hemoglobin, forming carboxyhemoglobin. This effectively crowds out the oxygen molecules, rendering a percentage of the blood useless for respiration.
The heart is thus forced to pump a hypoxic sludge through narrowed vessels. To compensate for this lack of oxygen, the body produces more red blood cells, polycythemia, which thickens the blood, making it more viscous and harder to pump, like trying to push molasses through a straw. This viscosity dramatically increases the risk of clot formation. The structural damage caused by smoking is foundational. The endothelium, the single-cell layer lining the arteries, is the first casualty. The toxic chemicals in cigarette smoke act like sandpaper on this delicate lining, causing microscopic tears and lesions. In a desperate attempt to heal these wounds, the body rushes cholesterol and platelets to the site. This is the genesis of atherosclerosis. But smoking adds a volatile accelerant to this process. It makes platelets hyperreactive. In a non-smoker, platelets slide past one another like smooth stones. In a smoker, they become sticky like Velcro. They adhere to the damaged vessel walls and to each other with alarming speed. A plaque that might have remained stable for decades can, under the influence of tobacco smoke, rupture and form a massive clot within minutes, leading to a sudden, fatal myocardial infarction. Historically, the medical community's relationship with tobacco is a dark chapter of negligence and manipulation. In the mid-20th century, before the landmark 1964 Surgeon General's report, cigarettes were not only socially ubiquitous but medically endorsed. Advertisements featured physicians in white coats proclaiming the throat-soothing properties of specific brands. It was the golden age of ignorance, where the correlation between the massive spike in heart attacks among middle-aged men and the prevalence of smoking was ignored. It took decades of epidemiological detective work to dismantle the industry's propaganda. Today, we understand that there is no safe level of exposure. Even social smoking or exposure to secondhand smoke carries a disproportionately high risk. The vascular system is so sensitive to these toxins that a mere 30 minutes of sets of hand exposure can impair coronary blood flow regulation to a degree similar to that of habitual smokers. In the context of treatment and recovery following a heart attack, cessation is the single most powerful pharmaceutical intervention available, surpassing the efficacy of any pill. The term treatment support is an understatement. Cessation is a rescue operation.
When a patient quits, the timeline of physiological redemption is remarkable. Within 20 minutes, heart rate and blood pressure drop. Within 12 hours, the carbon monoxide levels in the blood return to normal, instantly increasing the oxygen-carrying capacity of the circulatory system. This immediate boost in oxygenation is critical for a heart muscle trying to heal from infarction. It reduces the size of the ischemic penumbra, the area of tissue surrounding the dead heart muscle that is at risk of dying but can still be saved. However, the post-heart attack smoker faces a grim reality. Patients who continue to smoke after an acute coronary syndrome have a risk of recurrent heart attack and death that is double that of those who quit. The mechanisms of healing, re-endothelialization of stents or bypass grafts, are severely compromised by continued smoking. A stent placed in a smoker's artery is far more likely to undergo thrombosis, clotting, or restenosis, re-narrowing. The toxins inhibit the proliferation of healthy endothelial cells needed to cover the metal struts of the stent, leaving it exposed as a clot magnet. Furthermore, smoking interferes with the metabolism of critical heart medications. For instance, the hydrocarbons in smoke induce liver enzymes that metabolize blood thinners like clopidogrel faster, potentially rendering the dosage ineffective and leaving the patient unprotected. The psychological dimension of quitting in the wake of a heart attack is complex. Nicotine addiction is a neurochemical entrapment of the highest order, hijacking the brain's dopamine reward pathways. For many, the cigarette is a coping mechanism for stress, the very stress caused by the health crisis they are facing. This creates a vicious cycle where the anxiety of heart disease drives the patient back to the very agent causing the disease. Modern cessation protocols, therefore, must be aggressive and multimodal, combining nicotine replacement therapy, patches, gums, or receptor blockers like varenicline with intense behavioral counseling. The cold turkey approach has a high failure rate. The medicalization of cessation treats it as a chronic relapsing condition rather than a failure of willpower. We must also address the modern evolution of nicotine delivery, the electronic cigarette. Vaping has been marketed as a safer alternative, a harm reduction tool. While it eliminates the combustion of tar,
the investigative verdict on cardiovascular safety is far from exonerating. E-cigarette aerosols contain ultrafine particles, heavy metals, and volatile organic compounds that can still damage the endothelium and spike blood pressure. The long-term effects of inhaling heated propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin into the deep lung tissue are unknown, but early studies suggest that vaping still triggers arterial stiffness and oxidative stress. For a heart attack survivor, swapping smoke for vapor is not a clean pass. It is merely trading a shotgun for a pistol. The goal must be total freedom from nicotine to allow the vascular system to return to its natural elastic state. The cultural trajectory suggests a slow but steady strangulation of the tobacco industry, yet the global burden remains immense. In developing nations, smoking rates are climbing as tobacco giants shift their marketing focus to untapped populations. This ensures that the global pandemic of heart disease will continue to be fueled by tobacco for decades. The ultimate prevention lies in policy, taxation, plain packaging, and smoke-free zones, which have been proven to drive down heart attack rates on a population level. But for the individual, the decision to quit is a binary switch between accelerated decay and biological restoration. The body has a miraculous capacity to forgive the sins of the past, but only if the assault stops completely. In the war for cardiac survival, the cigarette is an enemy combatant that cannot be negotiated with. It must be eliminated.
4. Control blood pressure, the hydraulic siege. If the heart is the engine of life, blood pressure is the hydraulic force that tests the integrity of the entire machine. Hypertension, clinically defined as chronically elevated blood pressure, is widely known as the silent killer, a moniker that, while dramatic, actually understates the insidious nature of the condition. It is a silent siege, a relentless mechanical erosion of the cardiovascular system that operates without symptoms until the moment of catastrophic failure. To understand why controlling blood pressure is paramount in the prevention and treatment of heart attacks, one must delve into the physics of fluid dynamics and the structural limitations of human biology. The arterial system is designed to handle a specific range of pressure. When that limit is exceeded day after day, year after year, the consequences are not merely functional, they are structural, altering the anatomy of the heart and vessels in ways that are often irreversible. Blood pressure is measured in two numbers, representing two distinct phases of the cardiac cycle. The top number, systolic pressure, measures the force exerted against the artery walls when the heart contracts and ejects blood. The bottom number, diastolic pressure, measures the residual pressure in the arteries when the heart is at rest and refilling. A reading of 120/80 millimeters of mercury is considered optimal. When these numbers creep up to 130/80, 140/90, and beyond, the physics of the system turn against the body. The relationship between pressure and damage is linear and unforgiving. For every 20 millimeters of mercury increase in systolic pressure or 10 millimeters of mercury increase in diastolic pressure, the risk of death from ischemic heart disease doubles. The mechanism of injury in hypertension is a story of sheer stress and maladaptation. High pressure creates turbulent flow within the arteries. Instead of flowing smoothly, the blood hammers against the endothelial lining, particularly at bifurcation points where arteries branch. This mechanical trauma causes micro-injuries to the vessel wall. As we established at the dietary analysis, the body repairs these injuries with cholesterol and plaque. However, hypertension accelerates this process aggressively. It forces LDL cholesterol deep into the arterial wall, speeding up the formation of atherosclerosis. Furthermore, the constant high pressure makes these plaques unstable.
A stable plaque has a thick, fibrous cap. Hypertension exerts physical force that can tear this cap, causing the plaque to rupture and triggering the clot that causes a heart attack. But the damage is not limited to the pipes. The pump itself suffers. In the face of high systemic resistance, the heart must work harder to push blood into the circulation. This is analogous to lifting heavy weights. Over time, the heart muscle, specifically the left ventricle, thickens, a condition known as left ventricular hypertrophy, or LVH. While big muscles are good for a bodybuilder, they are disastrous for a heart. A thickened heart muscle becomes stiff and loses its elasticity. It requires more oxygen to function, yet the coronary arteries cannot supply enough blood to the overgrown tissue. This creates a supply-demand mismatch that can lead to ischemia even without a total blockage. Eventually, the stiff heart struggles to fill with blood, diastolic heart failure, or the muscle fibers stretch and weaken, leading to systolic heart failure. The historical evolution of blood pressure management is a testament to the slow grind of medical progress. For centuries, high blood pressure was viewed as a necessary compensatory mechanism of aging, essential hypertension, essential to push blood through stiffening arteries. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, with the Framingham Heart Study and the development of the sphygmomanometer, that the correlation between benign high blood pressure and massive stroke and heart attack rates was confirmed. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's death from a massive cerebral hemorrhage with a documented blood pressure of 300/190 millimeters mercury shortly before he died serves as a grim historical marker of this era of ignorance. Today, we treat hypertension aggressively, aiming for targets that would have been considered hypotensive 50 years ago. In the realm of treatment support following a heart attack, blood pressure control becomes the cornerstone of survival. The damaged heart is fragile. Subjecting a healing heart to high blood pressure is akin to redlining a car engine with a cracked piston. The goal is to reduce the afterload, the resistance the heart must pump against. This is where the pharmacological arsenal becomes critical. We do not just lower pressure, we engineer the hormonal environment of the cardiovascular system. The first line of defense often involves ACE inhibitors, angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors, or ARBs, angiotensin II receptor blockers. These drugs block the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAAS, a hormonal cascade that evolved to save us from dehydration and blood loss but kills us in the modern world. By blocking the production or action of angiotensin II, a potent vasoconstrictor, these drugs open up the blood vessels and lower pressure. But their value post-heart attack goes deeper. They prevent cardiac remodeling. After an infarction, the heart tries to change its shape, often dilating and becoming spherical, which is inefficient. ACE inhibitors chemically signal the heart to maintain its proper geometry, significantly improving long-term survival. Beta blockers represent another critical pillar of treatment. These drugs block the effects of adrenaline on the heart. By capping the heart rate and reducing the force of contraction, they lower blood pressure and crucially reduce the myocardial oxygen demand. For a patient with coronary artery disease, a beta blocker acts as a governor on an engine, preventing the heart from overexerting itself during physical or emotional stress. This significantly lowers the risk of a second heart attack and suppresses lethal arrhythmias, which are common in scarred hearts. Calcium channel blockers and diuretics, specifically thiazides, round out the strategy. Calcium channel blockers relax the smooth muscles wrapping the arteries, preventing spasms and lowering resistance. Diuretics reduce the volume of fluid in the bloodstream by prompting the kidneys to excrete sodium and water. Less fluid volume means less pressure, a simple hydraulic equation. The modern approach is often combinatorial, using small doses of multiple classes of drugs to attack the pressure from different physiological angles while minimizing side effects. However, the silent killer presents a unique challenge in patient compliance. Because hypertension is asymptomatic, patients often feel fine when their pressure is dangerously high and feel worse, dizzy, lethargic when medication lowers it to normal levels. This leads to a dangerous phenomenon where patients discontinue their medication, leading to rebound hypertension and sudden cardiac events. The investigative focus has thus shifted to adherence and monitoring. The era of the single office reading is ending, replaced by ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, ABPM, and home cuffs. We now know that masked hypertension, normal in the doctor's office but high at home, is a major risk factor, as is non-dipping status, where blood pressure fails to drop during sleep, keeping the cardiovascular system under tension 24 hours a day. The future of blood pressure management lies in the intersection of technology and biology. Renal denervation, a procedure that uses radiofrequency ablation to silence the overactive nerves in the kidney arteries that drive hypertension, offers hope for resistant hypertension. Meanwhile, wearable technology is moving toward cuffless blood pressure monitoring using optical sensors, allowing for real-time, beat-to-beat analysis of vascular health. Ultimately, controlling blood pressure is about preserving the elasticity of life. The arteries are designed to be dynamic, living conduits, pulsing in rhythm with the heart. Hypertension turns them into rigid pipes, forcing the heart to destroy itself in a futile battle against resistance. Whether through the sodium restriction of the DASH diet, the stress reduction of meditation, or the precision of pharmacotherapy, keeping the pressure down is the most effective way to ensure the hydraulic integrity of the human machine. It is a maintenance protocol that cannot be ignored, for the pressure that builds in silence eventually breaks the vessel in violence.
In the annals of medical history, few molecules have been as vilified, misunderstood, and aggressively hunted as cholesterol. To the layperson, it is a dietary boogeyman, a waxy substance synonymous with clogged pipes and early death. However, to the investigative cardiologist, cholesterol represents a complex biological paradox. It is absolutely essential for human life, forming the structural integrity of every cell membrane and serving as the precursor for vital hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Yet in its disordered state, it becomes the primary architect of the coronary blockage. The management of cholesterol levels is not merely a numbers game played on a lab report. It is a microscopic war for the preservation of the arterial lumen. The prevailing medical consensus, forged through decades of epidemiological battles and billion-dollar clinical trials, has crystallized into the lipid hypothesis, which posits that the elevation of plasma cholesterol, specifically the low-density lipoprotein, LDL fraction, is a direct causal agent in the development of atherosclerosis. To understand why management is critical for prevention, we must first deconstruct the transport mechanism of lipids. Cholesterol is hydrophobic. It does not dissolve in blood. To navigate the circulatory system, it must be encapsulated in protein shells known as lipoproteins. The drama of heart disease plays out in the ratio and behavior of these carriers. Low-density lipoprotein, LDL, has earned the moniker bad cholesterol, but a more accurate description would be infiltrating cholesterol. When LDL levels are chronically high, these particles do not merely float harmlessly, they invade. Driven by a concentration gradient, LDL particles burrow through the endothelial lining of the artery and lodge in the subendothelial space, the intima.
Once trapped, they undergo oxidation, a chemical spoilage that renders them toxic. This oxidation is the bell that rings for the immune system. Macrophages, the body's scavenger cells, rush to the scene to consume the oxidized LDL. However, they lack a stop mechanism for this consumption. They gorge themselves until they become bloated, microscopic spheres of fat known as foam cells. These foam cells die and coalesce, forming the fatty streak that is the precursor to the deadly plaque. The nuance of prevention lies in the granularity of measurement. For decades,
Doctors looked only at total cholesterol, a blunt instrument that often missed the forest for the trees. The modern investigative standard focuses on LDL-C and increasingly on apolipoprotein B, ApoB. ApoB provides account of the actual number of atherogenic particles, a far more precise metric of risk than the total weight of cholesterol. We now understand that small, dense LDL particles are more dangerous than large, buoyant ones. They are like BB pellets compared to beach balls, able to penetrate the arterial wall with greater ease. Managing cholesterol for prevention, therefore, is about reducing the total burden of these particles circulating in the blood. The lower the LDL, the less raw material is available to build the plaque walls that eventually close off the coronary arteries. The target numbers have shifted aggressively downward over the last 20 years. Where an LDL of 100 milligrams per deciliter was once considered optimal, preventative cardiology now aims for levels below 70 milligrams per deciliter, and even lower for high-risk individuals, adhering to the ruthless maxim, lower is better and lowest is best. In the context of treatment support following a myocardial infarction, heart attack, the role of cholesterol management undergoes a radical transformation. It shifts from a preventative measure to an acute stabilization therapy. This is the era of the statin revolution. Statins, discovered by Japanese microbiologist Akira Endo in the 1970s, are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, drugs that block the liver's ability to synthesize cholesterol. But their value to a heart attack survivor extends far beyond simply lowering LDL numbers. Statins possess what researchers call pleiotropic effects. They are potent anti-inflammatories. In the immediate aftermath of a heart attack, the coronary arteries are inflamed and the existing plaques are soft and friable, prone to rupturing like an abscess. Statins work to chemically alter the composition of these plaques. They draw the liquid fat out of the plaque core and encourage the formation of a thick fibrous cap, essentially turning a volatile landmine into a stable scar. This process, known as plaque passivation, is the primary reason why high-intensity statin therapy is mandatory immediately post-heart attack, regardless of the patient's baseline cholesterol levels. The science of lipid management has recently breached a new frontier with the advent of PCSK9 inhibitors. These are not pills,
but monoclonal antibodies, biological drugs engineered to target a specific protein in the liver. The PCSK9 protein normally degrades the receptors that clear LDL from the blood. By inhibiting this protein, these drugs allow the liver to recycle its receptors, clearing cholesterol with superhuman efficiency. In clinical trials like Odyssey and Fourier, these drugs have driven LDL levels down to unprecedented lows, single digits in some cases, resulting in the actual regression of plaque. For the first time in history, we are not just stopping the disease, we are reversing the geology of the artery walls. This offers profound hope for patients with familial hypercholesterolemia, FH, a genetic condition where the liver is incapable of processing cholesterol, condemning carriers to heart attacks in their 30s or 40s. However, the lipid investigation reveals a hidden villain that standard statin therapy cannot touch, lipoprotein A or LPA. This is a genetic variant of LDL with an extra protein tail that makes it exceptionally sticky and prothrombotic, clot-promoting. Approximately 20% of the population carries elevated levels of LPA, yet it remains largely untested in standard physicals. It acts as a silent accelerator of heart disease, independent of diet or lifestyle. For a survivor of a heart attack who has done everything right, normal LDL, healthy diet, active lifestyle, LPA is often the smoking gun. Currently, there are no FDA-approved drugs specifically to lower LPA, though RNA interference therapies are in late-stage trials. The management of this risk factor currently relies on aggressively crushing all other risk factors to compensate for the genetic handicap. The cultural narrative surrounding cholesterol has been fraught with skepticism, fueled by internet pseudoscience and cholesterol denialism, which argues that cholesterol is vital for brain health and that lowering it is a pharmaceutical conspiracy. While it is true that the brain needs cholesterol, it synthesizes its own supply. It does not rely on the LDL circulating in the blood. The investigative data from autopsies, genetic studies, and randomized control trials is irrefutable. Atherosclerosis is a cholesterol storage disease. Without cholesterol, plaque cannot form. The connection is as fundamental as the link between sugar and cavities. Furthermore, we must address the role of high-density lipoprotein, HDL, the so-called good cholesterol. For years, the strategy was to raise HDL, believing it acted as a garbage truck shuttling cholesterol out of the arteries, reverse cholesterol transport. However, the HDL hypothesis has largely collapsed in the wake of failed drug trials. Drugs that artificially raised HDL did not reduce heart attacks. We now understand that HDL function is more important than HDL quantity. A dysfunctional HDL particle, damaged by inflammation or oxidation, ceases to protect the heart and may even become pro-inflammatory. Thus, the modern therapeutic focus has narrowed with laser intensity on crushing LDL and ApoB. Ultimately, managing cholesterol is an act of biochemical engineering. It requires a departure from the naturalistic fallacy that natural levels are safe. In the modern environment of caloric abundance and sedentary living, our natural lipid levels are often lethal. Whether through the dietary restriction of saturated fats, the inhibition of liver enzymes via statins, or the genetic silencing of PCSK9, the control of serum lipids is the most effective lever we possess to halt the progression of coronary artery disease. A heart attack is the endpoint of a decades-long accumulation of lipid debris. Managing cholesterol is the daily sanitation work required to keep the vital pathways clear.
In the visual lexicon of health, the silhouette of the human body is the most immediate indicator of risk, yet the relationship between weight and heart disease is far more intricate than the simple mechanics of carrying a heavy load. Obesity is not merely a cosmetic issue or a failure of willpower. It is a chronic low-grade inflammatory state that fundamentally alters the hemodynamics, endocrinology, and structure of the cardiovascular system. To investigate the impact of weight on the heart is to explore the concept of the adipose organ. We no longer view fat cells, adipocytes, as inert storage lockers for excess energy. They are biologically active, secreting a torrent of hormones and cytokines that communicate with and often attack every other organ in the body, most notably the heart. The prevention of heart attack through weight management begins with understanding the geography of fat. Not all adipose tissue is created equal. The clear and present danger to the coronary system is visceral adiposity, the deep, firm fat that wraps around the internal organs, distinct from the subcutaneous fat found just under the skin. Visceral fat is metabolically hyperactive. It functions as a rogue gland, pumping out inflammatory markers such as interleukin-6, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha. These chemicals travel directly to the liver via the portal vein, triggering a systemic inflammatory cascade that inflames the endothelial lining of the arteries, accelerating atherosclerosis. A person may have a normal BMI but carry a high amount of visceral fat, the skinny fat phenotype, placing them at equal or higher risk of myocardial infarction than someone with general obesity. The mechanical burden of excess weight on the heart follows the laws of physics. Adipose tissue is vascular. It requires a blood supply. As body mass increases, the body must create miles of new capillaries to feed the fat tissue. This increases the total peripheral resistance, the friction the heart must pump against. To compensate, the heart creates more blood volume, hypervolemia, and pumps harder and faster. This creates a state of high cardiac output. Over time, this unrelenting working will cause the left ventricle of the heart to thicken and enlarge, left ventricular hypertrophy. While a larger muscle might seem stronger, a hypertrophied heart is stiff, prone to ischemia, and electrically unstable.
The thickened muscle outgrows its own blood supply, creating a scenario where a heart attack can occur even without a 100% blockage, simply because the demand for oxygen outstrips the supply. In the realm of treatment support and recovery, weight management is the most complex variable. Here, we encounter the obesity paradox, a controversial statistical anomaly observed in some studies where mild obesity appears to offer a survival advantage in patients with established heart failure. The theory suggests that having metabolic reserves helps the body withstand the catabolic wasting state of chronic illness. However, sophisticated analysis has largely debunked this as a statistical artifact caused by unintended weight loss in the sickest patients. The reality for the heart attack survivor is that excess weight complicates every aspect of recovery. It makes physical rehabilitation more difficult, increases the likelihood of surgical complications if bypass is needed, and renders blood pressure and diabetes harder to control. A critical, often overlooked mechanism by which weight destroys the heart is through the respiratory system. Obesity is the primary driver of obstructive sleep apnea, OSA. In patients with central adiposity, the weight of the neck and chest collapses the airway during sleep. This results in intermittent hypoxia, rapid drops in blood oxygen levels hundreds of times a night. Each drop triggers a violent sympathetic nervous system response, a surge of adrenaline that spikes blood pressure and heart rate while the patient is asleep. This nocturnal battering prevents the heart from getting its necessary rest period, dipping. The mechanical pressure changes in the chest during apnea episodes also stretch the atria of the heart, leading to atrial fibrillation, a major cause of stroke and heart failure. Treating the weight treats the apnea, which in turn saves the heart. The modern landscape of weight management has shifted from the simplistic calories in, calories out model to a hormonal intervention model. This is driven by the discovery of gut hormones like GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. We now know that in many obese individuals, the satiety signaling system is broken. This has led to the explosive rise of GLP-1 receptor agonists such as semaglutide. These drugs are revolutionizing preventative cardiology. Recent trials, such as the SELECT trial, have demonstrated that these medications do not just reduce weight, they directly reduce the risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular cardiovascular death by significant margins, roughly 20% in non-diabetic overweight patients. This suggests that the drugs may have direct protective effects on the heart and blood vessels, independent of weight loss, perhaps by reducing systemic inflammation and improving endothelial function. However, the healthy weight entry also encompasses the danger of sarcopenic obesity, the combination of low muscle mass and high body fat. Muscle is the metabolic engine of the body. It is the primary site of glucose disposal. When a patient loses weight but loses muscle instead of fat, common in crash dieting, their metabolic health may actually worsen. For the heart patient, the goal is body recomposition. Maintaining muscle mass is crucial for functional capacity and insulin sensitivity. This ties back to the necessity of resistance training in cardiac rehab. The heart relies on the skeletal muscles to assist in venous return, the pumping of blood back to the heart. Strong legs act as peripheral hearts. Weak legs leave the heart to do all the heavy lifting. The intersection of weight and metabolic syndrome creates a perfect storm for coronary events. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of conditions: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, and abnormal cholesterol levels that occur together. Central obesity is the sun around which these other risk factors orbit. Fat cells release free fatty acids that impair the liver's ability to process insulin, leading to insulin resistance. The pancreas pumps out more insulin to compensate. High insulin levels tell the kidneys to hold on to sodium, raising blood pressure. It is a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. Breaking this cycle often requires a weight loss of only 5 to 10%. The investigative data is encouraging here. One does not need to achieve a supermodel physique to harvest massive cardiac benefits. The first 10 pounds lost deliver the highest return on investment regarding blood pressure and insulin sensitivity. Culturally, the conversation around weight is fraught with sensitivity, but the biological reality remains indifferent to social sentiments. The heart is a pump rated for a specific workload. When the body mass index, BMI, climbs above 30, the risk of heart failure doubles. Above 40, it quadruples.
The rise of bariatric surgery has provided another window into this relationship. Gastric bypass surgery has been shown to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke by nearly 50% in severely obese patients, a benefit that persists for years. This confirms that the adipose tissue itself is a driver of pathology. In the final analysis, maintaining a healthy weight is about reducing the toxic load on the cardiovascular system. It is about shrinking the inflammatory factory of visceral fat, reducing the sheer volume of blood the heart must displace, and allowing the hormonal symphony of the body to play in tune. For the heart attack survivor, weight management is not about vanity, it is about survival. It is the unburdening of a damaged organ, giving it the physiological space it needs to heal and function. In a world of abundance, the discipline of weight control is one of the most profound acts of self-preservation available to the human animal.
To the uninitiated, the pathology of heart disease is often visualized as a plumbing problem, a simple clogging of pipes by grease and fat. However, the investigative lens of modern cardiology reveals a far more sinister and chemical agent of destruction: glucose. While sugar is the primary fuel source for human life, in excess it transforms into a slow-acting corrosive agent that rots the cardiovascular system from the inside out. The relationship between blood sugar and the heart is so profound that many cardiologists now classify type 2 diabetes not merely as a metabolic disorder, but as a cardiovascular disease equivalent. This designation implies that a diabetic patient with no history of heart attacks carries the same statistical risk of dying from a coronary event as a non-diabetic patient who has already survived one. Controlling blood sugar is not just about avoiding the lethargy of a sugar crash, it is about preventing the systemic caramelization of the body's vasculature. The mechanism by which high blood sugar destroys the heart is a study in molecular violence. When glucose remains elevated in the bloodstream, a condition known as hyperglycemia, it begins to bind indiscriminately to proteins and fats in a process called glycation. This is, chemically speaking, the same reaction that causes food to brown when cooked, the Maillard reaction. Inside the human body, this process creates advanced glycation end products, appropriately acronymed as AGEs. These AGEs are biological debris that embed themselves into the vessel walls. They cross-link with collagen and elastin, the proteins responsible for the flexibility of the arteries. The result is arterial stiffness. The vessels lose their ability to pulse and expand with the heartbeat, becoming rigid, brittle pipes. This stiffness increases the workload on the heart and raises blood pressure, creating a feedback loop of damage. But the assault does not stop at stiffening. Hyperglycemia is a direct poison to the endothelium, the single-cell layer lining the blood vessels. A healthy endothelium produces nitric oxide, a gas that keeps vessels dilated and prevents blood from clotting. High blood sugar quenches nitric oxide production, leaving the arteries constricted and vulnerable. Furthermore, the jagged, crystallized nature of glucose molecules acts like microscopic shards of glass, causing physical microabrasions on the arterial lining. These scratches become the perfect nesting grounds for LDL cholesterol to lodge and fester. Thus, high blood sugar is the accelerant that allows plaque to take hold. In the diabetic patient, this atherosclerosis is often diffuse, meaning it doesn't just form a single blockage in one spot, but coats the entire length of the artery, making surgical intervention like stenting or bypassing significantly more difficult. One of the most terrifying aspects of the diabetic heart is the phenomenon of silent ischemia. High blood sugar damages nerves just as effectively as it damages blood vessels, a condition known as diabetic neuropathy. While this is commonly associated with numbness in the feet, it also affects the autonomic nerves that innervate the heart. In a healthy person, a heart attack is announced by crushing chest pain, a biological alarm bell. In a diabetic, the nerves that transmit this pain signal may be dead. Consequently, a diabetic patient can suffer a massive myocardial infarction without feeling any chest pain whatsoever. They may experience only mild shortness of breath, nausea, or fatigue. This silent heart attack is a leading cause of sudden death, as the patient does not seek help until the damage is irreversible. Controlling blood sugar is the only way to preserve the integrity of this neural warning system. In the context of treatment and recovery post-infarction, glucose control becomes a high-stakes tightrope walk. During the acute phase of a heart attack, the body enters a state of extreme stress. The adrenal glands dump cortisol and catecholamines, adrenaline, into the system to keep the heart pumping. These stress hormones naturally drive blood sugar levels up, a survival mechanism known as stress hyperglycemia. The body is trying to mobilize energy to survive the trauma. However, for a recovering heart, this flood of sugar is toxic. It increases oxidative stress and inflammation, potentially expanding the size of the infarct, the area of dead tissue. In the intensive care unit, maintaining euglycemia, normal blood sugar, through insulin infusion is a critical protocol that has been shown to significantly reduce mortality in heart attack victims, regardless of whether they were previously diagnosed as diabetic. The pharmacological landscape of blood sugar management has undergone a revolution that has fundamentally changed cardiology. For decades,
the focus was simply on lowering A1C, the 3-month average of blood sugar, using insulin or sulfonylureas. While this saved eyes and kidneys, it did not always save hearts. The game changed with the introduction of SGLT2 inhibitors, sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors. These drugs, originally designed for diabetes, work by blocking the reabsorption of sugar in the kidneys, causing the patient to urinate out excess glucose. The cardiovascular results were shocking. These drugs reduced heart failure hospitalizations and cardiovascular death so effectively that they are now prescribed to heart failure patients who do not even have diabetes. They act as a diuretic, lower blood pressure, and shift the heart's metabolism to burn ketones, a more efficient fuel, rather than fat or sugar. This class of drugs represents the convergence of endocrinology and cardiology. Similarly, the rise of GLP-1 receptor agonists, such as semaglutide, has shifted the paradigm. By mimicking a gut hormone that signals satiety and insulin release, these drugs not only normalize blood sugar, but also induce significant weight loss and reduce systemic inflammation. The SELECT trial recently demonstrated that these drugs directly reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke. This proves that controlling blood sugar is inextricably linked to managing the inflammatory environment of the body. The sugar is the fuel for the fire of inflammation. Cutting the fuel supply dampens the blaze in the coronary arteries. We must also examine the concept of insulin resistance, the precursor to type 2 diabetes. Long before blood sugar levels rise high enough to be diagnosed as diabetic, the body struggles to process carbohydrates. The pancreas pumps out massive amounts of insulin to force sugar into resistant cells. High circulating insulin, hyperinsulinemia, is itself a growth factor for vascular smooth muscle cells, causing the artery walls to thicken and narrow. It acts as a fertilizer for plaque. Therefore, controlling blood sugar is a misnomer. The goal is to control the insulin response. This is achieved through diet, specifically the reduction of refined carbohydrates and the consumption of fiber, and exercise, which sensitizes muscle cells to insulin, allowing them to soak up glucose without the need for a massive insulin spike. The future of glucose management lies in the democratization of data. The continuous glucose monitor, CGM, once reserved for brittle type 1 diabetics, is entering the mainstream. These devices, which implant a tiny filament under the skin to read interstitial fluid glucose levels every few minutes, provide a movie of metabolic health rather than the snapshot of a fingerstick. They reveal the hidden spikes, the postprandial, after-meal, surges that go undetected in standard fasting blood tests. Research suggests that it is the variability of blood sugar, the roller coaster of spikes and crashes, that is most damaging to the endothelium. By using this technology, patients can see in real time how a bowl of oatmeal versus an omelet affects their biology, allowing for a personalized nutrition strategy that flattens the glucose curve and spares the arteries. Ultimately, the directive to control blood sugar is in order to preserve the chemical balance of the blood. The human body is designed to operate with only about 1 teaspoon of sugar circulating in the entire blood volume at any given time. The modern diet floods the system with cups of it. This deluge overwhelms the delicate machinery of the mitochondria,
creates toxic byproducts that stiffen the heart, and silences the nerves that warn of danger. Whether through the low-carb lifestyle, the strategic use of SGLT2 inhibitors, or the real-time feedback of biowearables, mastering glucose is the master key to preventing the metabolic corrosion that leads to heart failure.
In the grand investigation of cardiovascular health, stress has long been the elusive phantom, acknowledged by patients as a primary trigger, yet historically dismissed by mechanistic doctors as too intangible to measure. However, the era of dismissal is over. We now possess the biological maps to prove that stress is not merely an emotional state. It is a potent physiological toxin with a direct hardwired line to the coronary arteries. The heart and the brain are inextricably linked via the neurocardiac axis, a highway of nerves and hormones that translate psychological distress into physical damage. To ignore stress in the prevention and treatment of heart attacks is to ignore the driver while focusing solely on the engine. The evidence is stark. Chronic stress is as potent a risk factor for myocardial infarction as smoking or high cholesterol. The mechanism of stress-induced cardiac injury centers on the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and the sympathetic nervous system. When the brain perceives a threat, whether it is a saber-toothed tiger or an aggressive email from a boss, the amygdala sounds the alarm. The adrenal glands respond by flooding the bloodstream with catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline, and cortisol. In an acute survival situation, this is life-saving. The heart rate spikes, blood pressure surges, and energy is mobilized to fight or flee. However, modern life has trapped the human animal in a state of chronic, low-grade activation. The tiger never leaves the room, it just changes forms. This relentless bath of stress hormones keeps the cardiovascular system in a state of hypertension and inflammation. Adrenaline is toxic to the heart in high doses. It increases the contractility of the heart muscle, demanding more oxygen. Simultaneously, it causes the coronary arteries to spasm. If a patient has existing plaque, this sudden spasm can crack the brittle shell of the plaque, inducing a rupture and an immediate clot. This is the physiology of the Monday morning heart attack, a statistically proven phenomenon where cardiac events peak on Monday mornings, driven by the anticipatory stress of the workweek. Furthermore, cortisol, the long-term stress hormone, instructs the body to store visceral fat, increases insulin resistance, and suppresses the immune system, while paradoxically increasing systemic inflammation, the perfect recipe for atherosclerosis.
The most dramatic manifestation of the mind-heart connection is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome. This condition mimics a massive heart attack, chest pain, EKG changes, heart failure, but when the arteries are imaged, there are no blockages. Instead, the left ventricle of the heart has ballooned into a strange shape, resembling a Japanese octopus trap or Takotsubo, paralyzed by a massive surge of catecholamines triggered by extreme emotional distress, such as the death of a spouse or a violent argument. While often reversible, it proves that emotion alone can physically stun the heart muscle into failure. This syndrome serves as the ultimate biological proof that the heart is an emotional organ as much as a mechanical one. In the context of recovery and treatment, the management of the mind becomes a matter of life and death. Following a heart attack, approximately 1 in 3 patients develops clinical depression. This is not just sadness, it is a physiological inflammatory state. Depression increases platelet stickiness and reduces heart rate variability, HRV, a critical metric of the heart's resilience. Patients who are depressed post-MI are significantly more likely to die within the following year than those who are not. The giving up complex leads to poor medication adherence and a sedentary lifestyle, but the biological pathway of depression itself promotes arrhythmias. Therefore, treating the mind with therapy or antidepressants, such as SSRIs, which also have mild blood thinning properties, is a vital component of cardiac care. The type A personality profile identified by cardiologists Friedman and Rosenman in the 1950s remains relevant but has been refined. It is not the ambition or hard work of the type A individual that kills, it is the specific component of hostility and cynicism. The chronic anger and mistrust of others keep the sympathetic nervous system in overdrive. The antidote to this is the cultivation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. This is where the vagus nerve comes into play. The vagus nerve acts as the brake pedal for the heart. High vagal tone is associated with a lower resting heart rate and greater resilience to stress. Managing stress is often dismissed as soft advice, like taking a vacation. However, effective treatment requires rigorous physiological interventions.
Meditation and mindfulness are not spiritual luxuries, they are neural training. Studies using fMRI scans show that regular meditation shrinks the amygdala, the fear center, and thickens the prefrontal cortex, the regulation center. In the context of the heart, this translates to lower blood pressure and reduced arterial inflammation. Transcendental meditation, TM, specifically has been shown in randomized controlled trials to reduce the risk of heart attack, stroke, and death in patients with coronary heart disease by nearly 50%. This is an efficacy rate that rivals some medications. Biofeedback is another powerful tool in the recovery arsenal. By watching their heart rate variability on a monitor, patients can learn to control their autonomic nervous system through breathwork. Slow, rhythmic breathing, resonant frequency breathing, at a rate of about 6 breaths per minute, synchronizes the heart rate with the breath, maximizing HRV and activating the vagal brake.
This gives the patient a remote control for their own stress response, allowing them to manually downregulate their arousal state when they feel the surge of anxiety. Social connection acts as a buffer against stress. The Rosetto effect, a famous epidemiological study from the 1960s, studied an Italian-American community in Pennsylvania that had shockingly low rates of heart disease, despite smoking, drinking wine, and eating meatballs fried in lard. The investigation concluded that their tight-knit social structure, multi-generational homes, strong community bonds, and lack of loneliness shielded them from the cortisol spikes of modern life. Conversely, loneliness is now recognized as a risk factor equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. For the heart attack survivor, isolation is toxic. Cardiac rehabilitation groups often serve a dual purpose: physical training and the rebuilding of a tribe of peers, which lowers the psychosocial burden of the disease. We must also address the societal architecture of stress. We live in a culture that valorizes the grind and views sleep deprivation as a badge of honor. This cult of busy is incompatible with cardiovascular longevity. Sleep is the time when the cardiovascular system undergoes repair, blood pressure dips, and the brain cleanses itself of toxins. Chronic sleep deprivation, often driven by stress, keeps the body in a state of sympathetic dominance. Protecting sleep hygiene is therefore a stress management technique. Ultimately, managing stress is about resource management. The heart has a finite number of beats and a finite capacity for repair. Spending this resource on chronic anxiety, hostility, and worry is a biological bad investment. The profound truth of the stress-heart connection is that the body cannot distinguish between a threat to the ego and a threat to the life. It defends against both with the same chemical weapons. By learning to distinguish between the two, and by employing tools to dampen the physiological response, we spare the heart from fighting a war that exists only in the mind. The most sophisticated drug in the world cannot fix a heart that is being broken daily by the brain. True prevention requires a peace treaty between the two. In the cultural narrative of cardiovascular health, few substances enjoy as privileged and protected a status as alcohol. For decades, the public has been seduced by the French paradox, the epidemiological observation that the French populace, despite a diet rich in saturated fats and a penchant for cigarettes, suffered lower rates of heart disease than their American counterparts. The credit was liberally poured in the goblet of red wine, specifically attributed to resveratrol, a polyphenol found in grape skins. This created a seductive health halo around drinking, transforming a recreational neurotoxin into a perceived medicinal tonic. However, the rigorous investigative lens of modern cardiology has begun to dismantle this romantic facade. The relationship between alcohol and the heart is not a love story. It is a tale of chemical toxicity, electrical disruption, and metabolic chaos. While the industry-funded studies of the past suggested a J-shaped curve where moderate drinkers had better outcomes than teetotalers, newer, large-scale genetic analyses suggest that the safest level of alcohol consumption for the heart is in fact 0. To understand the preventative necessity of limiting alcohol, one must strip away the social lubricant and examine the molecule, ethanol. When ingested, ethanol is not treated by the body as a nutrient but as a poison. The liver prioritizes its breakdown above all else, halting fat oxidation to metabolize the alcohol. The primary byproduct of this metabolism is acetaldehyde, a highly toxic carcinogen and inflammatory agent. In the context of the heart, chronic or excessive alcohol exposure leads to a condition known as alcoholic cardiomyopathy. This is a direct toxic effect where the heart muscle, myocardium, becomes weak and thin. The contractile proteins within the heart cells are dismantled, and the chambers dilate, becoming baggy and inefficient. The heart struggles to pump, leading to fluid accumulation in the lungs and legs, classic heart failure. This is not a risk reserved only for the town drunk. Functional alcoholics who consume 3 to 4 drinks a day over years can silently erode their ejection fraction until the pump fails. The most immediate and dangerous impact of alcohol on the cardiovascular system is its effect on blood pressure. Alcohol is a biphasic drug. Initially, it may cause slight vasodilation, flushing, but as it is metabolized, it triggers a rebound vasoconstriction. It stimulates the sympathetic nervous system and the release of cortisol and adrenaline. Furthermore, it activates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAAS, in the kidneys, causing the body to retain sodium and fluid. This increases the volume of blood the heart must pump while simultaneously tightening the vessels it must pump through. Heavy drinking is one of the most common causes of reversible hypertension. For millions of men and women, their essential hypertension is actually alcohol-induced hypertension, fully curable not by a pill but by sobriety. Perhaps the most insidious threat alcohol poses to the heart is electrical. The heart beats on a precise electrical cycle, a rhythm maintained by the flow of electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, across cell membranes. Alcohol is a diuretic. It forces the kidneys to dump these vital electrolytes. This disruption creates an unstable electrical environment. The phenomenon known as holiday heart syndrome describes the spike in emergency room admissions for atrial fibrillation, AFib, following weekends or holidays involving binge drinking. In AFib, the upper chambers of the heart quiver chaotically instead of beating. This allows
allows blood to pool and clot. If that clot is ejected, it travels to the brain, causing a stroke. The connection is linear. For every daily alcoholic drink consumed, the risk of developing atrial fibrillation increases significantly. For a preventative strategy, protecting the heart's rhythm is paramount, and alcohol is a premier arrhythmia trigger. In the realm of treatment and recovery following a heart attack, the directive to limit or eliminate alcohol becomes a critical safety protocol. A heart that has suffered an infarction is a wounded animal. It is prone to electrical instability. The scar tissue formed after a heart attack disrupts the conduction pathways. Adding alcohol, a pro-arrhythmogenic agent, to this mix is akin to throwing a match into a powder keg. Sudden cardiac death, SCD, is a major risk post-heart attack, often driven by ventricular arrhythmias. Alcohol lowers the threshold for these lethal rhythms. Moreover, the interaction between alcohol and the pharmaceutical arsenal used to treat heart attack survivors is fraught with danger. Patients are almost always placed on antiplatelet therapy, aspirin, clopidogrel, ticagrelor, or anticoagulants, blood thinners, to prevent stent togosis.
Alcohol irritates the lining of the stomach and acts as a mild blood thinner itself. The combination drastically increases the risk of gastrointestinal bleeding. A bleed is a catastrophic event for a heart patient. It forces the discontinuation of life-saving antiplatelet drugs, which in turn skyrockets the risk of another heart attack. Additionally, alcohol is metabolized by liver enzymes, cytochrome P450 system, that also metabolize many statins and beta blockers. Heavy drinking can alter the levels of these drugs in the bloodstream, rendering them either ineffective or toxic. We must also investigate the metabolic payload of alcohol. It is liquid energy, providing 7 calories per gram, almost as dense as pure fat, 9 calories per gram, and nearly double that of carbohydrates or protein, 4 calories per gram. But unlike food, these calories provide no satiety signal to the brain. In the body, the excess energy from alcohol is rapidly converted into triglycerides, the fat that circulates in the blood. High triglyceride levels are an independent risk factor for heart disease and acute pancreatitis. Furthermore, alcohol drives the accumulation of liver fat, hepatic steatosis. A fatty liver is an inflamed liver, and this inflammation is systemic, spilling over into the coronary arteries. You cannot have a healthy heart with a sick liver. The two are metabolically joined at the hip. The cultural defense of red wine often hinges on antioxidants. However, to ingest a therapeutic dose of resveratrol equivalent to what has been successful in mouse studies, a human would need to consume hundreds of liters of wine a day, a lethal volume. The antioxidants found in wine can be obtained in far greater, safer quantities from blueberries, grapes, and nuts without the toxic baggage of ethanol and acetaldehyde. The medical community is slowly pivoting away from the moderate consumption recommendation. The World Health Organization has stated that when it comes to cancer and cardiovascular health, no level of alcohol consumption is completely safe. The sober curious movement and the rise of the zero-proof beverage industry mark a significant cultural shift that aligns with cardiovascular preservation. We are seeing a generation that views alcohol much like the previous generation viewed cigarettes, as a pleasurable poison that carries a heavy biological tax. For the heart attack survivor, the decision to drink is a gamble with diminishing odds.
The temporary relaxation provided by a drink is purchased at the cost of increased blood pressure, heart rate variability suppression, and sleep fragmentation. Alcohol destroys REM sleep, the restorative phase where the body heals. A recovering heart needs deep sleep as much as it needs oxygen. Ultimately, limiting alcohol is an act of unburdening the heart. It removes a chemical stressor that forces the heart to work harder, beat faster, and age quicker. In the grand equation of longevity, alcohol is a variable that introduces chaos into a system that requires stability. Whether preventing the first attack or surviving the aftermath of one, the clearest path to a strong, rhythmic, and resilient heart is one that is not clouded by the spirits of the bottle. The sober heart is a steady heart, and in the game of survival, steadiness is everything.
The human body is the most complex machine in existence, yet it is the only high-performance engine that owners routinely operate for decades without a diagnostic scan. The philosophy of modern medicine has historically been reactive. We wait for the symptom, the pain, the collapse, and then we intervene. In the context of heart disease, this strategy is fatally flawed. Atherosclerosis is a silent assassin. It does not announce its presence with a polite cough or a mild rash. It builds quietly, millimeter by millimeter over 20, 30, or 40 years. By the time a patient feels the crushing chest pain of a myocardial infarction, the disease is in its terminal phase. The first symptom of heart disease for 50% of men and 64% of women is sudden death. Therefore, the regular health checkup is not merely a bureaucratic ritual. It is the only surveillance system we possess to detect the enemy while it is still vulnerable to defeat. To understand the power of the checkup, we must differentiate between the cursory annual physical, a stethoscope on the chest and a pat on the back, and a comprehensive preventative cardiology evaluation. The latter is a deep dive investigation. It begins with advanced lipidology. As discussed in previous entries, knowing your total cholesterol is useless. A true checkup measures ApoB, apopropan lipoprotein B, and LPA, lipoprotein A. These advanced markers reveal the actual particle number and genetic risk that standard panels miss. Millions of people walk out of doctors' offices with normal cholesterol levels only to drop dead a month later because their standard panel hit a high particle count or a genetic clotting disorder. The checkup is the audit that exposes these hidden liabilities. However, the crown jewel of preventative diagnostics is the coronary artery calcium scan. This is a non-invasive CT scan of the heart that takes 5 minutes and exposes the patient to the radiation equivalent of a mammogram. It looks for calcified plaque in the arteries. A score of 0 means no calcified plaque. A score of 400 plus implies a ticking time bomb. The CAC score changes the game from guessing risk based on age and weight to seeing the disease. If a 45-year-old man has a CAC score of 100, he has the arteries of an 80-year-old. He does not need lifestyle advice. He needs aggressive pharmaceutical intervention immediately.
This scan destroys the denial that fuels heart disease. It makes the invisible visible. Beyond the plumbing, the checkup evaluates the electrical and structural integrity of the heart. An EKG electrocardiogram can detect past silent heart attacks, events that scarred the heart without the patient knowing. It can pick up signs of left ventricular hypertrophy, thickening from blood pressure, or prolonged QT intervals that predispose to sudden death. For the proactive patient, a stress test or an echocardiogram ultrasound provides dynamic data. It shows how the heart behaves under load. Does a wall of the heart stop moving when the heart rate rises? That is ischemia. That is the warning shot before the war. In the realm of treatment support following a heart attack, the checkup transforms into a lifeline of surveillance and calibration. The post-MI patient is navigating a minefield. Their physiology is in flux. The medications that save their life, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, statins, antiplatelets, are powerful drugs with narrow therapeutic windows. Regular follow-ups allow the cardiologist to titrate these dosages. Is the heart rate too slow? Is the blood pressure too low, causing fainting? Is the potassium rising dangerously due to the kidney medication? These adjustments cannot be made by guessing. They require blood work and physical examination. Furthermore, the follow-up is the arena where adherence is monitored. The non-adherence rate for heart medications is staggering. Nearly 50% of patients stop taking their statins or blood thinners within a year of a heart attack. This is statistically a suicide attempt. The checkup serves as the psychological anchor, the accountability mechanism where the doctor reinforces the why. It is also where the effectiveness of the intervention is verified. A repeat echocardiogram shows if the heart function ejection fraction is recovering. If it isn't, or if it's declining, it triggers the need for advanced therapies like ICDs, implantable cardioverter defibrillators, to prevent sudden death. The checkup is the feedback loop that keeps the recovery on the rails. We must also explore the role of the checkup in detecting the second wave of complications. Heart disease often travels in a pack with other conditions. The regular checkup screens for the onset of diabetes, HbA1c, kidney failure, EGFR, and peripheral artery disease, PAD. It also monitors for depression, which, as noted, is a massive risk factor for mortality post-MI. The physician's role is not just mechanic but sentry, watching the horizon for the approach of these comorbidities. The future of the health checkup is rapidly evolving into the realm of science fiction. We are entering the era of liquid biopsies, where a simple blood draw can detect circulating endothelial cells sloughed off from damaged arteries, or microRNA signatures that predict a heart attack weeks before it happens. Artificial intelligence is now being applied to retinal scans and EKGs, detecting subtle patterns invisible to the human eye that predict cardiovascular risk with uncanny accuracy. The checkup of the future will likely be a continuous stream of data from wearable sensors, analyzed by AI, with the physician acting as the strategic interpreter. However, the most critical component of the checkup remains the human element, the doctor-patient relationship. In an era of fragmented transactional healthcare, having a longitudinal relationship with a provider who knows your history is protective. This advocacy ensures that when a symptom arises, a twinge in the jaw, a shortness of breath on the stairs, it is not dismissed as anxiety or indigestion. The regular checkup establishes a baseline of normal for your specific body, making deviations stand out. Culturally, we must shift the narrative of the checkup from an errand to a duty. There is a pervasive machismo, particularly among men, that views avoiding the doctor as a sign of toughness. This ostrich effect, burying one's head in the sand, is lethal. Ignorance does not protect you from biology, it only disarms you. The most sophisticated medical technology in history, stents, bypasses, wonder drugs, is useless if it is deployed too late. In the final analysis of this top 10 investigation, the regular health checkup is the unifying thread that ties all other preventative measures together. It is the metric by which we judge the success of our diet, the efficacy of our exercise, and the control of our blood pressure. It is the moment of truly confront the reality of our biological choices. To prevent a heart attack is to be vigilant. To treat a heart attack is to be disciplined. But to survive and thrive in the long term requires the humility to submit to inspection. The heart gives us 100,000 beats a day, asking for nothing in return but the flow of blood.
The least we can do is check the oil and kick the tires once a year to ensure that the journey continues.
Conclusion: the Coronary Manifesto. We have traversed the landscape of the human heart, from the microscopic wars of the endothelium to the macroscopic habits of daily life. The investigation reveals a singular, empowering truth. The heart attack is not an act of random fate. It is the culmination of a biological sequence that can be interrupted, reversed, and mastered. By controlling the fuel, diet, the flow, exercise, blood pressure, the chemistry, cholesterol, sugar, alcohol, smoke, and the mind, stress, we build a fortress around our most vital organ.
The top 10 strategies are not merely suggestions, they are the laws of hemodynamic survival. In adhering to them, we do not just extend our lives, we elevate the quality of our existence, ensuring that the rhythm of our days is not cut short by the silence of a stopped heart. The power is, and always has been, in our hands.